So, welcome again to our series on research data management. Today's topics are the details of a data management plan. So what is the content of a data management plan? Well, we already had some previous video that explains what a data management plan is in general and what it is good for. This one is really about the details. Of course, we stick with our fake science example on squirrel research. Remy Reuse has already contacted the research data management team at his university and learned about a data management plan. Since he doesn't have a concrete template by his funder, he makes use of the template that this team has provided him as the template of the university. Here is an overview of the topics that occur within this template. And we will have, together with Remy, a look at each of these aspects and answer some of the questions that might occur within such a template. So we start with the project-specific data field. This is something where you make a connection to your administrative information. Of course, you have something like an ID of the project, a title, a funding period, things like that. But you can also think about whether there are some mandatory guidelines or some binding regulations that you have to adhere to when you perform research in this particular area or within this concrete project. So for Remy, he has learned from the research data management team that there's a guideline, a policy on research data management for his institution. Further on, a colleague of him also found out that the European Squirrel Research Institute has established a data policy that should also be taken into account within this project. Other sources of regulations or guidelines could be the laws or contracts. For example, a law on the protection of animals, or if you're working with personal data, data protection issues as provided by regulations from the EU. And if you're working on a contract or if you're working in an industry connection, then you might have a non-disclosure agreement with them that should also be taken into account. Ultimately, you of course always have to think about the good scientific practice and adhere to it. The next part concerns the integration of existing or the generation of new data. So that is really about your data. What data will you meet in your project? What data will occur? Do you reuse data? Where do you get it from? All these are possible questions. The one that we focus here is, what are the formats that you will meet within your project? And what is the total size of your data? So these are very common questions throughout all templates that exist. Remy and his colleagues came up with the list of these formats that will occur within the projects. So they will have pictures, and they have chosen the JPEG 2000 format because of its long-term preservation capabilities. Further on, we have text files that will occur and CSV files, as they, for example, be derived from the detector facilities that are used within the projects. And there are also some XML data, where some additional descriptive data is already included. So these file formats are the ones that they think in the beginning will occur, and they also estimate that round about 50 gigabyte of data will be generated within the next 2 years, not including the data that they reuse from Lehre. Now, if it turns out that some more kind of formats will occur or that some more data will be produced, that's not really a problem. A data management plan is something that really evolves over time. And so this is something that you need to adapt if something has changed, and then think what has an effect on the infrastructure, for example, that I use. Is there something where I must buy a new place where I can store data? So this is the intention really of a data management plan, and it really lives. It must be updated. Okay, what is the next aspect? You must think about the documentation and data description. Well, that's the core part. You will have and produce data. And some point in time you will, as long as you work with the data, everything's fine. But later on, somebody else might want to use the data. And you must think about other researchers that maybe are not even in contact with you, that should be able to read your data and interpret them if you have published them, for example. All this additional information is something that we typically describe with the help of metadata. And you should think about what kind of metadata is supposed to be stored with your data. For example, if you have here the control points and the data that will be collected by such a control point, you might have some ID that is iterating an integer. You might have a date and must agree on the format that is used here. For example, using the standard ISO 8601. Remy, of course, has an idea what data he will collect in the project. Further on, he also has the documentation of Louise Lieder's project, and he knows what they have recorded. They have also seen other data maybe from somewhere else, and maybe there's even within this small community an agreement on how you, for example, describe the color, so you have some agreed vocabulary that you can reuse, using B for black or R for red-brown, for example. All of this should be documented here in order to make it easier for somebody else later on to understand the data and to make it, well, compatible with other researchers. You should stick, where possible, with metadata standards or agreements that are already available. Another important aspect is the storage, backup, and preservation of data. So a data management plan typically asks you to think about what are suitable storage locations. At what point in time do you should think about preservation? Whose responsibility is this? And how do you possibly select which data needs an extended preservation and what other data might be deleted? So what's the situation in Remy's project? He has decided together with his researcher colleagues that every researcher on its own decides which data to keep and which data to delete. They only agreed that they focus on the files of the pictures and on the XML documents that they prefer over the unstructured textual documents because they have some additional metadata within them. They also decided that they shouldn't mess around with the archiving tool on their own, but instead hand over the files that they want to keep to Ashley, the administrator. She's much more capable of using the archiving tools available at the university and ensures that the data arrives at the institutional archive and is preserved there at least for 10 years. Another aspect that is of great importance is data sharing and data publication. Of course, not every project can publish data, but many can, and often many funders ask for that. So you must think about what are your plans regarding data publication. Is there data that you can publish? How and where should you publish them in order to make them findable? And how can you provide access to them, or under which conditions, for example, licenses? All these things need to be considered. For Remy, it's quite easy. There's a subject-specific repository in our fake science example, the Squirrel map, where you can publish freely the data on squirrel research. So it's an open access repository allowing other researchers to easily reuse the data and still confirm, for example, by referring to Remy if he provides data sets here. Eventually, we must think about responsibilities, duties, and costs. This is more something like the administration or organizational thing. So you must think, is there something like a financing for my data management? And what are the costs? That's hard to estimate. So Remy simply looks at the entire data lifecycle, at which phase, which efforts will occur. We have already learned that they decided that each researcher individually decides what data to keep and then to move them to Ashley, the administrator. All of these persons must have the time to cope with these tasks, and also, even if it's not such a complicated task, maybe with the administration and the archiving tool, it still takes some time and must be taken into account. Another aspect that might be of interest is that you need specialized hardware software for your project. For example, Remy has decided that he wants one of the squirrel detectors, WK420, inside his own lab for calibration purposes, and that he can have a closer look, in particular if you find errors in the fields and must understand why these errors have occurred. Further on, you must think about the costs of the usage of infrastructure. Do you have an institutional archive available? How much does it cost? Do you have to pay for the volume of data that you provide there? And the similar thing for the repository. Is it free of charge, as it is luckily the case for Remy and the squirrel map that he makes use of as a subject-specific repository? Okay, now we have worked through these 6 areas with the help of some of the questions that typically occur within such a template. If we make use of some templating tool or some online tool, it is of course much easier to arrive at the final document. But even if you don't use that, the point is that you have some document that is clear and accurate and be tailored to your project-specific needs. For example, you should have a front page like this one, where you have some easy identification of the project name, of the funding period, and the responsible person, not only for the document, but also for the data management. We also learned that such a data management plan will evolve over time. So a version history is really something that should be inside your data management plan. You need to update it, and you must always be sure which version you currently have at hand and whether it's the current one. You should be as precise and as clear as possible. For example, you could use tables for noting the data formats that will occur in your project, or the sizes of data that will occur, and also about the metadata that you use. Use some precise way to document what is happening here. In the end, if your project is at the end and you have regularly updated your data management plan, this data management plan is your master document of what has happened within your project with data. And it can possibly, hopefully, describe all the details that you need to understand and interpret the data that are available within your project. If you have any more questions on data management plans or need assistance in filling out a data management template, just contact us via the service desk. Thank you.